slavery, but this law, this bill is not implemented. A lot of people are using slaves, but, you know, that's fine. There's no prisoners in Mauritanian prisons. I denounced slavery, and I was in jail for 2 years just because I was standing up against slavery. But someone who is using slavery is someone who is using slaves. They are just free, and the law is not applied. So this is just a law and a bill that has been implemented just to fool the Western countries about what Mauritania really wants to do. People are born slaves because their mom is already a slave, and they believe and they are convinced that they are here. They have been born just to work without receiving a wage, without receiving salary. They don't have the right to get married if their master is not agree. They cannot travel if their master disagree. They have absolutely no right. The master has all the rights, and he can do whatever he wants with this person. So this is real slavery. There's also land slavery, because most of the former slaves are farmers. But what happens is that their land now belongs to their master. So if you are a slave and if you want to be set free, it means you have to leave your land. And if you leave your land, you leave your rights, because your land is belonging to your master. And if you want to continue on working and being a slave, you can do that. But if you want to be set free, you have to leave your land behind. And despite that situation, there is a bill now, a law that has been created in 1983, saying that the land belongs to the nation, land belongs to the state, and everyone in Mauritania is equal. Like every law, Mauritania is very good at creating law and adopting convention, but Mauritania is very good at non-applying those laws and those conventions. When there is a visit from someone representing a Western country, we are lying, we are showcasing things that are not true, and we show former slaves that are now ministers, and we tell them that everybody is equal. There are 3 ministers that come from a slavery background, but those 3 ministers, to become ministers, they have to say the official narrative. They have to follow, and they have to showcase what the government is telling them. So it's just to tell you that the struggle is a huge challenge in Mauritania, because we've got one state that is promoting slavery. The state is for slavery, and the state is accepting the situation, and they don't send people who use slavery to prison. I was a slave myself. I was born a slave. I spent 20 years of my life being a slave. And when then I went to school, I realized that the situation was not normal. And what I was going through, and what my mom was going through, what my brothers were going through, was not normal. And this is how I realized that I had to fight. And this is why I created that foundation to free the slaves, because the school was freedom for me. That's the school who set me free. That's the school and education that set my brother free. And I am convinced that the school and education is the only thing that can set people free. But today, the government and the state is not willing to give education to the slaves, because those who are in power, they send their kids to private schools using the money of the state. And us, poor people and slaves, we are victims of that system, and we don't have those opportunities. So we've got 2 separate worlds, 2 separate populations, 2 different citizens, and the foundation is here to denounce that situation, to stand against those two worlds, and we want to suggest and offer solutions. And to me, the solution is education, is school, and we need to send kids to school to set them free. Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much, Ibrahim, for that very powerful testimony and that situation in Mauritania. I will now give the floor to Geneva, to Jan, for the next interview. Thanks again, Ibrahim. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Jan, is it okay for you to?
Yeah, no, I'm good. I can hear you. I'm just still very impressed, to be honest with you, by both of our presentations, but also by the last one, which is, yeah, I'm still, I have to, the whole day, I have to say, I have to process a lot of things. Yeah, I'm here to welcome Paul. Paul, are you with us now? Yeah, you've been there the whole time. You're a human rights defender and one of the founders of the National Campaign for Dalit Human Rights in India. And I would just like you to maybe start, like our two previous speakers, to elaborate a little bit on the kind of form of specific caste discrimination, which does represent one of the most serious and widespread global human rights challenges, especially when you look at the amount of people, the number of people that are affected. So maybe give us also like as an introduction from your perspective about your work, about the problem, so that we can learn from your knowledge there.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Paul Divakar Namala, and I'm currently the convener of the Global Forum of Communities Discriminated on Work and Descent. And together with Brahim, who just spoke earlier, and Versalini, we are all of us from around 21 countries trying to say there is a particular system which is not the binary of black and white of the race, which is not indigeneity, which has been one civilization colonizing another civilization or another country and displacing them. We are not also of different, of one particular religion trying to dominate another religious minorities. We are also not majority minority, but this particular group, which is now being called as communities discriminated on work, which is some kind of a forced labor, manual, menial, like what Brahim has just said, forms of slavery, and also is by descent. That is, we are born into from generation to generation in a particular social background. Now, these communities have not like the other communities which are very homogeneous. We are very heterogeneous. We come from one part of the world, which is like Japan. There are certain communities called Burakumin all across Asia, especially South Asia, India, Nepal, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Malaysia. And also several countries in Africa, like Brahim has just shared, from Mali, Mauritania, Niger, Senegal, Burkina Faso, Ghana, and several of these African, West African countries, but also Somalia in East Africa, and some other countries which are yet to be, yet to emerge these struggles of these communities. But Roma, Sinti, Gypsy communities in Europe, and also later Versalini will also share the experience of Quilombola communities in Brazil. Now, together, these communities have been internally colonized by our own dominant in the hierarchy of these communities in our countries. So in India, I come from a community called Madiga in southern India, Andhra Pradesh. And politically, we are there across all over India. And we are termed as, we have given our name as Dalits, and earlier it is called untouchable communities. And this is another form of slavery. And this is because of internal colonization and a hierarchy that has been created, which says dominant are pure communities and we are so-called impure communities. And therefore, there is segregation, there is prohibition of marriages, there is completely segregated living, and there is forced labor and menial labor, forced into scavenging, forced into all forms of work, which is called indecent form of occupations. And the wages are either extremely low or actually you're enslaved. So you don't have right to any remuneration for the work that you do. And not only the economic rights, but also whenever you raise and say, I am a citizen in this democracy and I have equality and I have a right to walk on the streets like everybody else. I have a right to education, right to health. When these rights are asserted, there is an extreme amount of backlash. So, for example, in India, where I come from, and I'm also from the Dalit community, we have 50,160 forms of, 160 matters of incidents of human rights violation, heinous crimes, recorded by the state. And we say for every one recorded case, there are 10 unreported cases, which are completely denied or prevented from being reported because of the impunity. The law is there, it is not implemented. So the violence is very extreme on these communities, and therefore we are banding ourselves across the world and saying that we are a global forum of communities discriminated on work and descent. And we would like to demand that there is an international declaration, a UN declaration for the rights of the communities discriminated on work and descent to protect us from human rights violations, giving us right to education, right to health, right to access to land, right to political expression, right in terms of relief and rehabilitation during disasters, but because in many times in disasters and in war, many of our people are neglected and completely let alone. And this is the declaration that we are giving ourselves, that we have this right, and we would like UN to promulgate this UN declaration on the rights of the communities discriminated on work and descent. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask you a follow-up question on that? Because also thinking about what Aya said earlier about the role of the state in Lebanon. And now you talk about the role of the state in India. Because I'm completely, I agree with what you said with the necessity of an international convention. But what she described for Lebanon was actually the state enabling that kind of policy as a replacement or cheap replacement for a social security system it's not willing to sponsor. So there you have actually state capacity actively encouraging that. You described for me that it's not clear. Is there like a lack of state capacity? Is there a lack of state will? Or is there like such a strong tradition, roots in society that the state is just abstaining there? And if, like, what's the role in the state of changing it? And what do you think would an international agreement contribute to changing the role of the Indian state in overcoming these kind of discrimination?
Let me quickly get to the first set of questions that you have raised. That is it the lack of political? Is it such deep traditional cultural practices that state is not willing to go against it, or is it lack of state's capacity? I would say it is all three, but the fulcrum is that deep cultural belief is still existing. And therefore, the wider society, including the civil society, feels that these communities need to be put in place. So we have in India alone around 210 million people who belong to the Dalit communities, who are at least half of them go through a routine form of violence or exclusion or forms of discrimination. Half of them. That at least this is 100, solid 100, we are saying, given being very liberal. Now, why is it like this? Because India has laws. As Brahim has said, in Mauritania, you have a law. But in India, right from 1950 onwards, it has forbidden what is called untouchability. This form is called untouchability, and untouchability practices and violence because of that is being is banned, and there are laws. But because of the cultural belief, which is strong, and because of the economic factor in question, which is you then have a very cheap form of labor that is being produced by the slave-like communities in India, you do not want to upset, because the agricultural workers, most of them happen to be from the Dalit communities, earn less than $1 a day. And there are only around 30% of the year they have some form of wage labor available. And most of the lands are still in the hands of the dominant caste. So therefore, you create a dependency, and you are not allowing these communities to have any form of free choice of labor. They are forced. Some of them are forced into manual scavenging, including cleaning of human excreta. Not that we don't have the technology. We have the technology, but you do not want to employ, the state does not want to employ that. So there is a complicity of the state. First, the cultural is very strong. And then under the present government, we see that they are taking us back into the traditional Hindu majority. And many of the Hindu communities still believe in this system, though there are many in the Hindus who are opposing this, but they want to create an umbrella of the so-called Hindu nation and perpetuate these forms. So the culture is a fulcrum, complicity of the state, and therefore state not willing to have any political will or designate resources to increase its capacity to implement and block the impunity. Now, coming to the second question, why do you want to go to, or what is the effect of the international policy frames? Now, one of the things that in India that we have seen, and it goes for all the countries that we are talking about, whether it's in South Asia, Africa, or in a country like Brazil, now these are not visibilized. These are not articulated as human rights violations. These are seen as a social evil. Now we are converting these into human rights violations, turning victims into human rights defenders, and demanding realization of our rights. Brahim says in a different way, through education. What it means is it's not just formal education, it's also education to realize your rights, education to know your rights, education to see how you can articulate these rights into demands. And therefore, these, if you can cross above the national boundary, you create a pressure from above. And if you continue to strengthen the victims and turning ourselves into human rights defenders, you create a pressure from below. And this sandwich pressure is what is really needed to abolish this system. And for that, one of the key things is we need to band ourselves right from Japan to Brazil and in all these countries, wherever these systems are there, to visualize and see that we are in one bind and we would like to challenge this system and fight for it anywhere in the world.
Thank you for this clarification. This, I think, very convincing argument for a mixture of strong local struggles and multilateral processes, which, I mean, I'm still, as I said, stuck by our first speaker before I head over to Mexico, said that we are now seeing recruitment is not happening in Sierra Leone for some process. So we're seeing a globalization which is deep-rooted in deep localized traditions of exploitation. And yeah, I think we'll bring everyone in for a round of comments later. I would like to hand over back to Esteban and Jan for the introduction of our, I think, last panelist in this round. And I'm glad she's visiting us, and I'm glad we have a good gender balance here. Then as well, welcome. We end on a high. I see a question from Brahim. Do we want to address this now, or do we want to, shall we just first wrap up the presentation and then bring you in?
As you prefer, yeah. Okay. Brahim, tu voulais intervenir?
Brahim, did you want to intervene, Brahim?
Oui, on entend.
Yes, yes. I just want to answer simply to the gentleman this question. Is it a lack of will? What is the problem? Is to say that Paul answered very well. He explained very well. It's the same situation in Africa. Above all, it's a communal system which has power. These slave masters have the power, the political power, the economic and religious and military power in Mauritania, and they do not want to apply laws. What can we do? We need to have an international pressure on them because they're scared. They're scared of the UN. When sometimes there is a special rapporteur of the UN, you know, for the contemporary forms of slavery, and now he's in Mauritania. When he comes, this rapporteur, everybody wants to show his lovely face and say, yes, 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 we are against slavery. However, the will is not there. Then the UN needs to put great pressure. All the rapporteurs need to come to Mauritania and fight against poverty, against racism, in order to put a pressure. As well, we need to help the former slaves to go to school. Otherwise, there's a lot of money, but there is a lack of will in order to assist schooling when it comes to the former slaves. We need to push the Mauritanian government to give a specific feature to education among the families where there are former slaves. It must be an international pressure because here they're not working, they're liars. They only listen to the West when the interest is threatened. When they don't have any loans from the World Bank, then they begin to show a nice face. So they need to feel a pressure, you know. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Brahim.
Thank you very much, Ibrahim, for your answer. I'm going to give the floor to Esteban for the next interview.
Well, thank you very much to Brahim, Paul, Aya, and we would like to introduce the last speaker of this segment. So, for the interpreters,
Entonces, la idea es que
this conversation will be in Portuguese. So the idea is that I will be translating into Spanish so that you can translate from Spanish.
Então, eu estava apresentando você, eu estava falando que você é a última invitada do nosso painel. Vercelina Dias é membro da Coordenadora Nacional da Articulação de Comunidades Quilombola no Brasil. Ela é a primeira advogada quilombola no Brasil, se eu entendo bem também. Ela é defensora dos direitos, então, das comunidades quilombolas. Eu queria, então, começar a entrevista, perguntando você primeiro para nos contar um pouco sobre a sua experiência na luta pelos direitos dos quilombolas e a experiência agora, sobretudo, com a questão do trabalho forçado, das novas formas de escravidão também, que sofrem as comunidades quilombolas, as comunidades afro-brasileiras, e a discriminação, por exemplo, por parte de um governo fascista, como o governo que agora temos no Brasil. Então, eu queria só perguntar para você se você poderia falar 2, 3 frases para eu traduzir as pessoas que estão presentes, e aí a gente faz fala dessa maneira. Então, eu vou somente traduzir a pergunta e depois eu passo a palavra para você. Muito obrigado. Então, estava dizendo que íamos apresentar
I was saying that we are going to present our last speaker, this panel, President Elias from Quilombola communities in Brazil. She is the first Quilombola lawyer in Brazil. She's a defender of the human rights of these communities, and we would like to ask her about her experience in the defense of the rights of these Quilombola communities and her experience in relation to discrimination and forced labor and the new forms of slavery suffered by Quilombolas in Brazil, especially in discrimination with a fascist government like the one they have now. Thank you very much.
Obrigada, Esteban. Boa tarde, aqui no Brasil é tarde, né, a todas, todos. Como já apresentado, meu nome é Vercelene Dias, sou quilombola do povo Calunga, aqui no estado de Goiás, no Brasil, atualmente resido em Brasília, atuo como advogada na defesa dos direitos das populações quilombolas, atualmente coordeno a assessoria jurídica da Coordenação Nacional de Articulação das Comunidades Negras Rurais Quilombolas, sou fundadora da Rede Nacional de Advogadas e Advogados Quilombolas aqui no Brasil, faço parte da Associação de Pesquisadores e Pesquisadoras Negras também, e integro o coletivo de mulheres da CONAC. Também faço parte, aí, como já colocado por Paul, do Fórum Global de Comunidades Discriminadas no Trabalho e pela Descendência. Também sou doutoranda pela Universidade de Brasília, na linha de movimentos sociais, conflitos e sociedade. A minha atuação...
Só um momentinho para traduzir, porque eu acho que eu não consegui...
Give me a moment to translate, please, because I won't remember.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much. So, Vercelina was saying, basically, she was telling about all organizations she works with in defense of Quilombola organizations, and apart from these activities, she is also doing some studies in the University of Brazil. Yes, a PhD.
A defesa dos direitos das populações quilombolas, eu costumo dizer que ela é desde quando nasci, né, que uma das maiores reivindicações da população quilombola aqui no Brasil é justamente o direito ao território, né, o direito ao território ancestral para a sobrevivência das populações. No entanto, a gente, enquanto quilombola, sofremos, né, a discriminação. A gente trata aqui no Brasil de racismo estrutural da sociedade brasileira, estruturada justamente por causa do racismo, por causa, em decorrência, né, e como todos sabem, da escravidão. Enfim, mas gostaria de trazer uma fala, né, tratando do contexto geral, e a partir disso, tratar especificamente das comunidades quilombolas, porque a gente tem um problema hoje aqui no Brasil com relação às populações quilombolas, que é a invisibilização. ou a inexistência de dados sobre essas comunidades. Hoje, no Brasil, há várias formas, né, da escravidão moderna, né, contemporâneas, que atingem homens, mulheres, com maior incidência, com certeza, entre as mulheres negras, entre as pessoas negras, sobretudo, essas mulheres, esses homens, né, essas crianças e adolescentes que vivem aí em situação de extrema vulnerabilidade. Apesar do aumento, né, da incidência de fiscalização contra o trabalho escravo em área urbana, isso ocorre justamente pelo fato de ter maior facilidade, né, de denunciar e também de fiscalização nas áreas urbanas. No entanto, dados, né, eu vou trazer aqui dados de alguns estudos feitos por algumas organizações aqui no Brasil com relação à escravidão moderna. Dados do Observatório de Erradicação do Trabalho Escravo e Tráfico de Pessoas, levantado entre 2003 e 2020, confirmam que 70% do trabalho escravo está ligado ao trabalho agropecuário, ou seja, acontecem nas zonas rurais. 45% das pessoas resgatadas em situação de trabalho análogo a escravo são pardos e 16% são amarelos, né, 13% são pretos, ou seja, a grande maioria são pessoas negras, são pessoas pretas, e aí falar um pouco também como que a incidência da escravidão, do trabalho análogo à escravidão moderna, tem relação também com a educação, porque cerca de 37% das vítimas resgatadas, elas tinham somente até o 5º ano do ensino fundamental. 30% eram analfabetas, né? Ou seja, a maioria das pessoas resgatadas hoje no Brasil do trabalho em situação análoga ao trabalho e escravidão, são pessoas que não tiveram acesso ou que não têm acesso ao sistema de educação, não têm acesso à escola ou não estudam, ou seja, pela ausência da política públicas. E isso reflete muito as questões nos quilombos, né? E hoje, a maior incidência nos territórios quilombolas que a gente, enquanto pela coordenação, consegue visualizar, a maior incidência do trabalho análogo à escravidão fazem nos quilombos, são as maiores vítimas, né, nos quilombolas são crianças e adolescentes, devido a ausência da política pública de saúde e educação dentro das comunidades quilombolas. Muitas crianças e adolescentes são obrigadas a sair dos territórios quilombolas, que a maioria se localizam na zona rural, em pequenos municípios, para viver nas cidades, ou seja, com família de fazendeiros, que já muitos têm fazenda dentro dos territórios quilombolas, de classe média alta, ou famílias ricas. Enfim, ao sair da comunidade e morar nessas casas de famílias, nas comunidades, essas crianças e adolescentes, elas são submetidas ao trabalho análogo à escravidão, ao trabalho doméstico, né, à exploração infantil e ainda à exploração sexual. Ou seja, e aí a gente tem exemplos disso, inclusive do meu território, né, eu sou da comunidade Calunga, onde a gente teve aí um escândalo que ficou conhecido no Brasil todo, e eu trago isso como exemplo, né, em que meninas calungas fizeram esse percurso, né, de sair da comunidade para estudar e acabaram sendo exploradas, viraram empregadas domésticas, crianças, né, em casa de famílias, e foram exploradas também sexualmente. A gente tem casos no Quilombo Calunga do Mimoso, por exemplo, em que trabalhadores que lutam até hoje no sistema de justiça, no órgão de justiça, no Ministério Público do Trabalho, para ter seus direitos trabalhistas reconhecidos, depois de passar mais de 15 anos trabalhando para fazendeiros, né, que têm propriedade dentro das comunidades quilombolas, sem qualquer tipo de remuneração. Então, esses são alguns exemplos que a gente traz com relação às populações quilombolas, que são visualizados, né, por nós, pela coordenação, entre outros exemplos, né, entre outras situações que vêm acontecendo no território nacional. E apesar dos esforços, né, da pressão da sociedade civil, na fiscalização desse tipo de situação, ainda é muito baixa, né, as incidências, em decorrência das várias situações, né, e da extensão também do território e das localidades onde geralmente ocorre esse tipo de exploração do trabalho escravo da pessoa humana. De acordo com dados, né, da Subsecretaria de Inspeção do Trabalho, do Ministério da Economia, nos últimos 25 anos, mais de 55 mil trabalhadores brasileiros foram resgatados, né, do trabalho escravo contemporâneo no Brasil por ação desse grupo especializado. Em 2020, mais de 900, né, pessoas foram resgatadas do trabalho escravo, e em 2021, esse número mais que dobrou, foram mais de 1.900 resgatada. Isso, e uma das maiores ações, né, de resgate de trabalhadores análogo à escravidão ocorreu aqui do lado, né, da capital do Brasil, no Distrito Federal, onde mais de 100 pessoas foram resgatadas do trabalho escravo. No entanto, a tendência, né, que a gente tem hoje no Brasil é de que esse número, ou que aumente, né, esse tipo de crime em decorrência dos efeitos da pandemia, né, que continuam, e da política adotada pelo atual governo, que, enfim, brasileiro. E aí, com o agravamento, né, do desemprego, que bateu recorde, né, nesse período, né, que, segundo os dados do IBGE, atingiu mais de 14 milhões de brasileiros, né, no Brasil. Tudo isso evidencia para um aumento, né, da pobreza extrema no Brasil, da fome, enfim. E, além disso, ainda temos empecilhos que são impostos aí às equipes de fiscalização, seja de recursos financeiros, orçamentários, seja de recursos humanos, de pessoas que atuam no combate à escravidão. Apesar dos avanços que a gente tem tido com relação ao combate ao trabalho escravo no Brasil, hoje, uma das principais empecilhos que dificulta essa fiscalização trabalhista e combate às formas de trabalho escravo e aliciamentos a crianças, adolescentes em situação de extrema vulnerabilidade, é a ausência de fiscalização ou dificuldade de fiscalização. Pois a maioria dos casos hoje de resgate no Brasil, elas só acontecem devido a denúncias, né, denúncias anônimas, denúncia de pessoas que estão passando pela situação. Nesse sentido que são resgatados, mas ao contrário, esses resgates eles não acontecem, ou seja, as incidências só acontecem quando há denúncia, né? E como que você denuncia esse tipo de situação em comunidades quilombolas que vivem em extrema vulnerabilidade, em situações de isolamento, sem acesso a meio de comunicação adequado, que não sabem nem aonde recorrer para procurar seus direitos, né? E nesse caso dos quilombos, a ausência de dados, ela dificulta ainda mais, né, para as comunidades quilombolas. E essa situação, a fiscalização e a atuação das autoridades, né, da sociedade civil, para fiscalizar essa situação, em decorrência da inexistência de dados, de saber aonde estão, quem são, quantos são essas comunidades, né. Situação que coloca, e sempre colocou, né, as comunidades quilombolas aí à margem dessa sociedade brasileira, vulnerabilizando-as e ainda negando vários direitos importantes aí, com relação à não exploração do trabalho infantil da criança, do adolescente negro, da criança quilombola, a não exploração da mão de obra dessas pessoas que já são aí, já têm seus direitos violentados, que já são violadas e que se encontram aí em extrema situação de vulnerabilidade. Nesse sentido, é muito importante, né, a continuidade das políticas de combate ao trabalho escravo, de exploração de crianças, de adolescentes no país e de formas, né, formal, de geral, né, mundial, aí, esse combate à discriminação, dessas formas, o combate às formas de trabalho escravo, né. E, para isso, né, a gente entende que é extremamente importante a continuidade desse diálogo e de estratégia, né, para a construção de políticas de enfrentamentos à desigualdade, à miséria, à pobreza extrema, à fome e a todas as formas de escravidão da pessoa humana. Então, são essas as minhas palavras que eu vou concluindo, né, para tratar sobre essas questões com relação à situação de trabalho escravo no Brasil, relacionada às comunidades quilombolas.
Muito obrigado, Verceline. Eu vou traduzir isso um pouco para as pessoas que estão se escutando em francês, em inglês, em espanhol. É muito importante o que você acabou de falar, então eu vou traduzir um pouco simplesmente para que todo mundo possa compreender o que você acabou de falar. Muito obrigado. Então, simplesmente traduzco un poco rápidamente antes de pasar al próximo segmento en español, de manera que nuestros traductores puedan traducir al francés y al inglés.
I will translate into Spanish for our interpreters. So what Verceline just said, I mean, he was saying that from the day she was born, she has been committed to Quilombola communities and something very important for these communities, which is the right to own land. So in these communities, there's a lot of discrimination. She was talking about the difference between slavery in urban areas and slavery in rural areas. In urbans, there is a higher fiscalization because there is a higher access to justice, higher level of education. But in the rural areas, they're very low in rates of fiscalization. And she was giving us some figures about slavery in Brazil, about other crimes. She said that 70% of the slavery in Brazil is agricultural work, people working in the countryside, and the most part of these workers suffering this modern slavery, most of them are black people. She was saying that there was something wrong also with education because most victims of forced labor are people without access to the education system. 37% of these victims rescued from slavery only studied for 5 years, and 30% of these workers rescued from slavery are not willing to write or read. So one of the victims of this forced labor are the quilombolas, also children and teenagers. And sometimes they are forced to go to live to the city and they end up in the houses of rich families working for them as domestic workers. And they are also working in slavery conditions there, like forced labor, we could say, and also sexually exploited, raped, or working for big farm owners where they work with no remuneration, and despite the efforts of civil society, fiscalization is still very low. She was given more details about this. So, for example, in 2021, 1,900 workers were rescued from forced labor in Brazil. Only in Brasilia, 100 people were rescued from slavery. And these numbers increase thanks to the effects of the pandemic, thanks to the policies of the new government, thanks to the increase of unemployment, to the increase of poverty, also the increase of hunger,